Reading from Luke chapter 23, verses 33 to 49. When they came to the place that is called the Skull, they crucified Jesus there with the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. Then Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." And they cast lots to divide his clothing. And the people stood by, watching. But the leaders scoffed at him, saying, "He saved others, let him save himself, if he is the Messiah of God, his chosen one." The soldiers also mocked him, coming up and offering him sour wine, and saying, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself." There was also an inscription over him, "This is the King of the Jews." One of the criminals who were hanging there kept deriding him and saying, "Are you not the Messiah? Save yourself and us." But the other rebuked him, saying, "Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed have been condemned justly, for we are getting what we deserve for our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." He replied, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." It was now about noon, and darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon, while the sun's lights failed, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Then Jesus, crying with a loud voice, said, "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit." Having said this, he breathed his last. When the centurion saw what had taken place, he praised God and said, "Certainly this man was innocent." And when all the crowds who had gathered there for the spectacle saw what had taken place, they returned home, beating their breasts. But all his acquaintances, including the women who had followed him from Galilee, stood at a distance, watching these things. Amen.
Friends, let's pray. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. A few days ago, I was out for a walk in our neighborhood, as I'm sure many of us are doing these days. And I ran across an old friend who I hadn't seen for some while, who was also out walking. And from a safe distance, we chatted for a few minutes. And of course, we talked about what we're all talking about, is these extraordinary times that we're living through right now. And just before we departed, she said, "It feels like Good Friday." Indeed, these times feel like Good Friday. There are so many dimensions to Good Friday. We could spend a lifetime just exploring them all. There have been the great questions that have been there right from the very beginning of humanity. Why do good people suffer? Why do humans torture and kill one another? Why do humans suffer and die? And where is God in all these? These are the things that philosophers and theologians write books on, and they've written them for centuries. But as we gather as the people of God on this Good Friday, it seems to me that we're to do something much more basic and much more simple. We are to draw near to the one who suffers. We are to draw near to Christ and Christ's suffering on the cross, and stand there as the first disciples stood and witnessed as well. To stand with the suffering around the globe and to not run away. It is one of the most strange and mysterious aspects of our Christian faith, this drawing close to Jesus in his suffering. In finding in this particular suffering something redemptive. Not redemptive in the suffering and death in itself, but being with Jesus as he suffers and dies. There is something about being with Christ and the way he embraces the suffering and teaches us something about that becomes and has the potential for us to become redemptive in our lives and situation as well. This year, I've been struck by a particular dimension of suffering that I never have paid attention to before. And perhaps you've noted it as well. It's the suffering of distance, the suffering of not being able to touch. And we've witnessed that over and over again as we have seen pictures of loved ones gathering outside of hospitals or nursing homes, not able to visit their loved ones inside. And they have spoken that the most painful aspect of this is knowing that they cannot hold the hand of that loved one and tell them how much they love them and give them that reassurance that comes by human touch. And then there's the agony of those who have lost relatives or friends to this COVID-19, who cannot touch the body, cannot even see the body. The body is in one of those blue or orange sacks, plastic sacks, or in a closed coffin. The pain and agony of not being able to touch and hold. This got me thinking about touch in the last days and hours of Jesus' life. It seems to me why Jesus so treasured that touch of Mary when she broke that perfume over his feet and anointed his feet and dried them with her hair. The last time in the scriptures we hear about Jesus being touched by people who loved him, because we know that from then on it's a story of not touching, where Jesus asked his disciples to come and pray with him in the Garden of Gethsemane, to be close with him, to stay awake, and they all fall asleep. And then when the arrest of Jesus comes, Jesus is taken away and they only see him at a distance from then on. Peter follows, wanting to be close, but not too close so he doesn't get swept up in the same net that has entrapped Jesus. And when we come to the cross, again, there's that painful separation where Jesus is kept at a distance. We know that most of the male disciples are not anywhere close. It is only the women who come close. And then there's still that painful separation as Jesus is on the cross and the soldiers keep the women at distance. And finally, we know that the people that touch Jesus' corpse and bring him down from the cross are not disciples, but strangers. They give him the decency of a decent burial. But notice even on Easter, it is the desire of the women to go and anoint Jesus' body, to touch Jesus' body and anoint it for burial, for proper burial, that brings them to the tomb early that morning. the desire to touch and anoint. And even in the resurrection, when Jesus calls Mary by name and she recognizes the risen Lord, even then she is not allowed to touch or embrace him. Even in Easter joy, there is the pain of separation and distance and not touching. There's a poem by Carolyn Forche, a little line that I quite love. The heart is the toughest part of the body. Tenderness is in the hands. We are physical beings, and touch is the measure of our love. A mother's tender touch of her baby ensures that that baby can begin to trust the world and find her place in it. Lovers seal and explore their love, not by words, but by touch. And the hand on the hand of a friend who is troubled can bring a sense of peace and comfort that words alone can never bring. And so it's curious in this time of no touch that we become aware of the pain associated with distance and not being able to touch. My son came home a couple days ago, not to come into the house, not to touch us, and my wife and I met my son at the driveway, and my wife burst into tears when she couldn't give him a hug, and I know you've probably had some of that same pain with loved ones in your own lives as well. And we see Jesus. Jesus touched all the time. He dared to touch those whom others were frightened to touch, like lepers. Jesus touched the dead, not worrying about being contaminated by them or made unclean by them, but rather raising them up. And so we find Jesus on this Good Friday, having hands immobilized, nailed to a cross. And in the end, Jesus, with arms outstretched, entrusting himself into the hands of the one who loved him from the beginning and loved him to the end. Father, into thy hands I commit my spirit. And somehow, by God's grace, those pinned hands, but those outstretched arms, now embrace us. Now embrace the world. Now embrace all suffering. And in the mystery of grace, and in those outstretched arms, we find healing and embrace by the one who loves us now and always, Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.